Hello, my name is Matt, and today I wanted to take you through the process of remastering one of the levels from one of my old games. So if you haven't heard, I'm making a game called Burden of Truth that is basically a sequel to a game I developed in 2018, and in the process of making this game, I have to basically take a look at all of the old levels that I've made a long time ago and kind of bring them up to modern standards. So as you can tell, some of these levels are quite bare bones. It's fun to look back and see how much I've evolved. Basically, a lot of these levels just consisted of flat walls, some sort of pillar, some sort of wall decal, and that's about it. So not much to go off, but if you want to bring this into sort of like a more impressive presentation, a lot of tricks have to be done, and I thought it might be interesting to show you what exactly those tricks are. So we're going to be doing some level design, taking you on this journey. I figured it would be kind of nice to just like record my process of doing one of these, and it should be insightful for anyone interested in level design or even just like how I go about looking at my past work and reinterpreting it for new projects. Of course, you've probably seen this example on my social media accounts. This is a very bare bones level, a bridge, which had this really basic road structure that just kind of went on, and I plopped down a few trees that really were not all that interesting, and had this weird picture of a skybox that's just kind of plastered over the level. But compare that to now, and well, things are pretty different. I've learned quite a lot about 3D modeling, about placing down levels, and about just rendering in general. Just good tricks for photorealism, for lighting, for physically based materials, shaders, and all that sort of stuff. Post-processing effects. It's all pretty clearly displayed here in this new level. So we're going to be doing this kind of same process, just bringing it up to this level of detail. Maybe not this complicated, but something close to it, because, you know, the game's got to match the consistency all the way through. We're going to be doing that for, here we go, the Cross Law Office building. So this is just a simple room, 2 rooms really, just one that has these filing cabinets and some random wood cabinets, I guess. Bench. We've got a door here. We've got like kind of the centerpiece, his desk, and a window, and then a chair. Of course, he's got some Easter eggs. He's got like past evidence, or at least that's the idea, sitting on the side there, and some objects on his desk. And that's pretty much it. I mean, the wall was just this repeating texture. There's a kind of cut in the middle to make this wood trim. And then the floor and ceiling are almost even the same material, but they're both wood. So it's a really simple scene. And for creating the new version of this scene, we're going to have to put in some more details, put in some more work, look at references, and just generally go through a more intense level design process. And in doing so, not only will you learn what I've been able to do, what tricks I've used to improve my work, but just how I build the game in general, which I think is going to be really interesting. Okay, so back in the modern version of Unity, I've built this empty scene, which is just called Cross Law Office, and I've placed it into a folder that's very neatly organized, which is very important for any sort of game development. The first thing that I typically do with building an empty scene is to just bring in my core objects. So this is kind of a system stack that is unique to this game. I basically just placed a bunch of important systems into this prefab, which I bring into every level in the game. And this is just a way of getting code instanced into the scene without having to rely on singletons or static variables or anything like that. They're all instantiated and they're all always sitting there in every scene. And that's basically just a guarantee that I make to myself to know that every scene is going to have the same properties. So this one controls basically the weather and the time of day and stuff like that. These are all just things that are specific to this game. And then this prefab controls all of the characters. It basically gives you a reference back to any character in the scene or any like effect that's not just a piece of level geometry. Stores a lot of things here. Also positions and angles which are used in the story system. And then finally, I want to bring in the camera, which is pretty important for the level design because you can place this and kind of get like a nice default view to see in your game view. It also has a post-processing stack, which will kind of define the look of the level thanks to all of these color adjustments and the vignette and and the ambient occlusion, which is extremely important for casting more shadows in screen space. So I'm going to delete the default camera then because we have the game specific one. It also has, of course, all of the code for controlling where the camera looks, and we'll get into that part too. Then what we're left with is just the light, which I'm going to put into a lighting object. Again, this is just for organization, and we're going to customize it quite a bit in this process as well, but that's good for now. So then I'm going to bring in the original scene, which I made in Burden of So then I'm going to bring in the original scene, which I made for Burden of Proof. So in Blender, I've just appended in that same model. It actually has polygon errors in here, so I might not keep it for long, but this is a good starting place to know what the proportions are going to be. And of course, we're not going to follow that entirely either, but it is good to stay authentic to what was there originally. So here's my new file that I've made. And this Blender file is basically just going to act as the base structure. This is a common thing that I do in all of my levels. I just have one work file where I can put everything that is going to be static. So everything that's going to be sitting in place, not moving, and just like essential to the level. That includes any sort of landscape or big important central building that is specifically unique to this level. So I call this kind of file a structure, and anything else that goes into the level, props or large buildings or anything like that, those are just going to be called objects. And that's just a way for me to organize my blend files a little better. So in this structure, we have, of course, the Blender camera and the light, which I'm not going to use. I'm going to light it entirely in Unity. It's just easier that way. And I'm going to make sure that I keep the link to this Blender file so that anytime I make changes, it's going to update right into the scene. If I was to unlink this prefab, then it would be a lot more difficult to add in other objects because I'd have to go through the reimport process or manually line up things that I've already lined up in Blender. Okay, so I'm going to make a tab called Geometry, make sure it's zeroed, and then I'm going to make another one, call it Structure, and then that's where this goes. We'll put it right there. Just going to get some other common organization stuff into here. So I do have entities, which will be characters that we're going to use later. Positions, which are for script system, angles, and I think that's good for now. I'm going to add in effects under geometry. I'm going to add in objects. And at its core, this is kind of just what the layout is of my levels. It's probably not exact. I'm going to go and tweak this a little bit, but we'll start with that. Okay, so back to the structure here. There's no interior faces, which makes it a little tough. Well, because I could just invert the normals on this. See if that does anything. Yeah. Okay, that'll give me enough of an idea. So, inverting the normals just means that I'm looking at the other side of the faces. Only one is ever rendered. Only one side is ever rendered for optimization purposes, and by inverting it, we now see the inside of those faces rather than the outside. And again, this is all just to line up what the new version of this office is going to look like. So now there's a bit of a creative task ahead of us. I'm going to have to create some floors, so maybe I'll start with that. Here's the reference. I guess I will make a new layer for it. Let's say collection 2. So I can just use the number keys now to toggle between the reference and what'll be the real thing. And then to make the real thing, I'll start with a plane, and then I'll just line it up with this reference. I will also kind of move the reference because I can do that. And maybe center it around there somewhere. It doesn't have to be exact. Just going to scale this up, and this will be the floor. Move it slightly above the 0 point. Get it there, and then I'm gonna extrude right along where the next room starts. And it's going outside of the boundaries, but that's totally fine. It makes it easier to shape that way. So we got a rectangle, but it's only 2-dimensional, so I want to make it 3-dimensional by just extruding all of these down, and then I have a shape like that. So I'll save that and see what it did. Nope, wrong Unity. Okay. Make sure these are zeroed, and this is zeroed, and this is zeroed, so that they're all at the origin of the world. And then camera. I'd like this to face the other way, I think. Because this is facing forward, so this is kind of like north with a rotation of 0. You can see all the axes. The blue arrow is pointing in the Z direction. And I kind of would like the office to be flipped the other way, maybe. So I could either rotate the whole model in Unity, or I could do it here. Let me see. This, okay, in Blender it's facing correctly, so I'm going to rotate it in Unity. Just 180 degrees. And then camera can rest right here. So another thing that's helpful at this stage is to have some sort of reference for how tall a person is, which means I'm going to have to bring in Conrad Cross. It's his office, so it only makes sense that he should be standing in it. And with this, we can get good height measurements for how tall the doorways need to be and the windows and everything like that. The question I'm thinking about now is, should I expand this room a little bit, or shrink it, or change any of the size? I think it's fine for now, and we can do a walk around test later to make sure that it feels right. At this point, I'm gray boxing, which is a term you might have heard before in level design. I want to just place in the rough proportions of the things that go into the scene, and then I will actually fill out the details of that when I have a good sense of where everything should be and how it feels to like play in the level. One thing I noticed is gotta reset the normals on this, make sure they're not inside. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and then time to make the walls, which is going to be a different object. Make sure it's here. Should also rename this stuff. Cross law office underscore main floor. And those can be walls. The walls I'm going to construct with, again, a plane. I'm just going to line up where things should be. Making sure that it has thickness this time so that it's not just a single polygon holding up the whole wall. Okay, and then here there's a problem of lining up this wall to this. And the way you can do that is with the snap tool. So I'll just change this to vertex, and then I'll hold Control, hover it over the vertex that I want to snap to. Make sure it's correct. Put another edge loop in. Move it to that one. And then now I can fill these. And then that gives me kind of like a ring around this whole room, which I can then extrude up to get some walls. So now it looks like this. Another thing is it would be good to just turn off the reference, because mainly right now I just need it in Blender. Okay, and then it'd be good to get the other wall. So rather than making a cut into this existing mesh, I'm just gonna make a new mesh, but under the same object. Let's see, it's not filled, so I'll just fill that face. Yeah, actually I'll just take this all the way down. And then carve out a doorway out of that in a second. I'll just rotate this. Alright, and then my view got a little wonky here, so I'm just going to hit the period key on the numpad to recenter the view. And then I'll use edge loops to carve out this doorway. And actually, in Burden of Truth, there's a standard doorway size, which I'm going to follow. Instead of doing this, or maybe it doesn't matter, because there's no actual door mesh that needs to go here, but there might be a trim. Let me take a look at the measurement to make sure. Edge length, and then now I can see in meters how far everything is. So this would be 2 meters wide. Need to recalculate the, oops. And I'll punch a hole in that just to visualize it better. Okay, so that's where the doorway would be. And then I'm going to bring in some test objects to reference against. Okay, here's a standard doorway. I'm not sure if this is correctly sized, actually. Maybe not. Yeah, that seems better. And then how well does it fit in here? Although I'm not putting an actual doorway in this spot, it'd be good to just make sure that it's standard. So that in case I needed to, or maybe just for the case of it matching what the player has seen in every other level. Fill those in, and then recalculate the normals. There we go, that's at least a little better. So, hide that, and here's the gray box of the level. It's missing a ceiling, but that's not too important. What matters is how does it feel to walk around in this space. So I'm going to grab the core object. I'm going to assign the player, and that I think is all I need to do for everything else to auto load and kick in. Let's hit play. We should be able to walk around. Oh, one other step is collision mesh. So this floor right now is just a cube, and I'm pretty sure it's going to stay that way. So I'm going to use a box collider because it's cheaper and more reliable than using a mesh collider, which is another reason why I've split out the walls and the floor into their own mesh, because when the floor is its own mesh, I can very easily have the box collider component auto set its boundaries to the same as the floor. For the walls, we can't get away with a simple box collider, and obviously it would be better in the long run to use box colliders to create all these walls, but this is where the laziness comes in, and I just throw a mesh collider on it. And that'll be good enough. So it's always good to split out objects by category as well, because the colliders have materials, which is going to determine how they sound when the character walks on it. And I've created basically some presets here for different sounds that could happen when the steps occur. And I know this is going to be wood, so I'm going to choose that material for wood. And that's just my code running on all of these characters that is going to detect the floor and which material it is, and then it's going to know which footstep sound to use. I'll move cross up a little bit. And now it should work. So you can run around and see what it's all like. I think with the volume down. There, you can hear the wood. For the story, you're not really going to be walking around this space. You're mostly going to just see it from conversation points. So let's think about it from here. Maybe from this corner shot. Does it still seem right? I think so. The ceiling, probably I will move up a little bit to give it more space. But the rest of this seems good. I don't want it to be too big because it should be a little cozy. Especially since we're going to be putting in more detail objects than there were originally, it's going to shrink the space in a little further. So I'm not too concerned about it being too large right now. So I'll just make that change. Let's get the ceiling higher and put in an actual ceiling, which means duplicating the floor, calling it ceiling, and then moving it up in edit mode, not in object mode, so that it retains its center point. That's fine. And then, okay, and I do want to do the materials early on so that we can get a sense for how it's going to look in the end. Even though we don't have any details or anything like that, it is good to just get like the color scheme going so that you can visualize what changes are going to be good to make as you go. So I'll just start doing that. Let's make a ceiling material. So I like to put what the material is into the name itself, like what the type of the material is. So this is like ceiling wood. These walls, they're kind of like wallpaper, or they were originally. And they were green. Maybe I'm just going to put main walls green, and then cross law, office, main floor wood. So that we have 3 different materials to work with to start. I might even delete everything here because I kind of don't care about these materials in the reference object. Altogether, there are just 3. There's another material there. Wonder where that... Well, I wouldn't know. But I do know that when I see the 0 next to material name, it means that it's unlinked, and the next time I reload the file, it's gonna disappear from existence. Reload, save again. There. Now all the materials have been eliminated for good. Back in Unity, we need to actually use these materials, so I'll click on the file, and I'm gonna extract them. So that'll mean that I can work with them in Unity without having to worry about them getting unlinked. So this is the link right here between Blender material and Unity material. If I hit extract, I can make a new folder for them, and this is where they're going to exist in this file that I just made called materials, and it created defaults for them. And then you can see that they're linked. So I can do something like change one of these materials in Unity, and then have it look a certain way here. But if I go back to Blender, nothing's changed, and I can make whatever changes I want to this material, and they're not going to be reflected here. It's only the name that's going to be linked. So if I was to basically reassign this wall texture to be on a different object, it would know to pick that up and to put our new red material onto the new object that we put in. So that's very useful for keeping everything synced. Again, another benefit of not unpacking the prefab that comes when you bring in a Blender file. And it's going to help a lot when we make further changes down the line. It's pretty dark in here, so maybe we'll get a light. We do have a directional light. This will act as the sun. Actually, I'm going to delete it. I'm going to bring in a directional light from a different scene. Let's say the main courtroom. So this is an interior. So I know that the presets for these lights are going to match kind of like the interior light setting that we want for here. Lighting, just drag all those in. Put that on the top. This is fine. And then this one is just used for controlling the skybox, because when it turns to night, I still want the main light to be to basically become the moon. You can imagine that as the sun moves around the Earth, when it becomes nighttime, it'll reach the horizon and then start pointing this way, which we don't want, because I want it to become the moon instead. And in order to do that, I basically just tell the light to go in the other direction and represent the moon moving across the sky until it reaches back down, and then it becomes the sun again. So that's all pretty cool, but the Unity procedural skybox system doesn't play nice with that because it expects that your sun is going to go all the way down and around. As you can see, the skybox turns to night when the sun is past that horizon line. So that's why I use a fake light, which does go all the way around, which is not actually emitting light, but it's used to control the skybox. And there's the moon position. So in the lighting tab, in order to make that happen, I just need to assign the fake light to be the sun source. And then the skybox, I can just change to BOT Basic Sky is the material that I made, which works for pretty much every scene. So we get a consistent style. Okay, so then anytime I want to move the default sun position, I have to bring both of these objects together. So let's just get them over here. And then I think the sun is best served kind of peeking in through the window, which I know is going to be at this front spot that Conrad is looking at. So I'll rotate the sun to be like that. It's roughly here for now. And then when we get basically a cutout into this side of the wall here, we're going to get a light leak into this room. And that's again why it was important to create both sides of the walls and not just one side, because it allows you to do lighting from outside of the room coming into the room, and everything else that it hits here is going to become shadow as it comes into the room. That's one small improvement that I've tried to make over the burn-proof levels. Then we're going to need more lights to basically stop this from looking like garbage. So here's this. I'll just bring in the spotlight. Spotlight is useful because it can use shadows because they're emitted from a certain range, but it's kind of tricky to work with because, well, you'll probably see, quite limited in where the shadows can appear because it can easily get blocked. And also when you have a angle this big to cover the room at this height, the shadows can become low resolution. So you can actually change the shadow resolution of the main light, which is the directional light that we just set up, and also for the additional lights, which is just any other light that's not the main light. Maybe it means non-directional lights, but I don't know for sure. So every object can have up to 8 lights. The total shadow atlas resolution is as high as it can go, which is 4096. And then the tiers are which lights receive how much of the atlas. So the first light, the high light, can get basically half of that entire atlas. And then the next 2 lights can use the other half. So that's kind of the limits that you have to work with here. Of course, I can have more lights than just 3. They just can't have shadows. So for Burden of Truth, basically all scenes are limited to 4 shadow casting lights, 1 from the main source and 3 from additional sources. And typically I don't even reach that limit. I just do like 1 or 2 additional shadow lights, and then other lights that I put in are fill lights. Basically just lights that don't have shadows, which, I mean, this one doesn't have any right now. And that would make it easy to just make mood changes from outside. So if I raise the intensity, you can see how, like, lighting it from non-realistic angles can kind of just like set the tone of a scene, even without the shadows. So these are all things to consider. For now I'm going to make this... Wait, did the original... The original level just did not have any lights at all. It probably had a point light. A point light just sitting in the middle. Oh yeah, you can kind of see it there. It's very faint. And then a directional light coming in from the sun, but it's got no shadows. So that's going to be one big improvement, I guess, on the new level. Got to figure out where this light is going to go. Probably just in the middle of the room. It's a little boring, but it's probably what's going to make the most sense, because you have to imagine that there's going to be lights on the top hanging down. And I would say either here or here. That's good for now. Bring the intensity down. Tint it slightly orange, maybe, to match kind of like the warm scenario. I can call this like main room light. This is going to get soft shadows, which all those shaders recompile. Make sure we're on the highest tier. Yeah, so even with half of the Shadow Atlas resolution taken up by this one light, it's still pretty blocky, and to some degree there's not going to be much that can be done about that. It can be improved by reducing the angle, but then you get less coverage. If you have less coverage, maybe you feel like you want to move it up, but then you reach a point where, well, the shadow is going to intersect this piece of geometry, and that's not good. So this is about the limit of where it can be. If I want the top parts of this room to be lit, I'm going to have to increase the angle and move it down. Save that. That'll do for now, and we'll come back to this and tweak it. It's an iterative process, and it's going to take a while. So that's just what you have to do when designing levels. Okay, so all of that was just to get some more light in here so that I can see what the material is going to be when I put that down. So I'm just going to search for wood. I probably already have a good wood texture. That looks fine. That's all it takes. Just if you're missing textures, if you need to find textures, you can look them up on free texture sites. I think textures.com switched to completely paid, but at the time when they had free textures, I grabbed a bunch of them, used them in a lot of my projects, and some of those even carried over here. Oh, we're gonna have a UV problem soon. I'll get to that. And then nowadays, if I'm looking for new textures, I'll typically go to, I think it's called Polyhaven. Yeah, Polyhaven Textures is a great replacement for that website, so definitely check this out. You can find even higher resolution textures than what was previously available on textures.com. And they have normal maps too. Although I don't use them, I typically generate my own just because I feel like I have more control that way. I haven't really been able to utilize their normal maps properly. Anyways, lots of cool stuff you can find here, though the selection is a little bit limited, but they're in the process of adding more all the time. And hey, if you want to support them, this is a pretty cool site that seems to be community driven, so could always use more resources going into this place. I use it all the time, and I hope you will too. So that's basically how I get my textures. If I need to build any, I will do so in Photoshop. I'll paint it or I'll photo bash it, anything like that. I don't usually take pictures of stuff, but that's another option that you could do. You could just go out into the woods, take a picture, and then make it tileable, and that's a pretty great way of creating assets from scratch. For now though, I'm going to stick to probably using the textures I already have, and maybe for some unique ones, I'm going to have to go out and find some. I'm thinking the wallpaper is going to be one that I don't just have right off the bat, so we'll look into that. The floor needs some work, so the reason it's stretching is because I have not done the UV unwrapping, which means I just had to bring out a UV editor and Smart Project, and then there you go, it's unwrapped. So Blender is a tool that just automatically unwraps based on the angle of surfaces, which is going to help a lot for speeding this process up. One thing though is that for a surface this big, like a floor, I do want to scale up the UV like past where it goes, and I don't know if this is like a standard thing that people do, but this kind of helps me to reuse materials more often, because an object that is this big in the world, this whole floor underneath this, is going to take up a lot of UV space, like texture space. And if I wanted to bring this material over to something smaller, like let's say a file cabinet, I could do that, but only if the tiling matches. Since I know this material is going to be tiled, I can scale the UV based on how big the object is, and then I get more accurate tiling when I bring it over to a smaller object, because a smaller object would have its UV scaled in like that. So that's kind of like a trick that I like to use in order to save time and resources, because, well, it's just a lot easier when you can reuse as many materials as you can. Of course, I'm making unique ones right now, but in the future, we could come across a time where I might need a floor and I just need to grab whatever I've got and I can just reuse that whole material without needing to think about it or to create another unique material that has its own tiling rules and so on. So I'll just do the same thing for all these. Just scale it up. Again, it doesn't have to be exact. I'm just roughly like guessing based on past experience. Maybe these should match. Like I tend to use the corner of the window to measure how far or how big I need to scale things. I think these also have plenty of areas, so I'll do that. And that should be good for now. So now we see that resolved, and of course, because the UVs are so big now, it made all the tiling out of whack, so let's redo that. You don't want to choose a tiling that's too small, like let's say if we started off at 0.3, obviously that would create ugly bumps in resolution. However, if you tile it too much, then it becomes very noticeable that it's tiled. And also it just doesn't make sense for certain materials, like what kind of wood panels would be that tiny compared to Conrad's feet. So there is a balance that you have to find, but it is tough, especially for exterior scenes like grass. Grass is really hard to get right without splat maps. I mean, I'm not using terrain system, so I'm kind of limited to just plopping down a single grass material to cover vast open areas, and that can kind of get really tricky to erase the tiling. One way that you can erase tiling is with the detail inputs. So this is basically like a secondary tile that you can put on top of the original tile, but it can be tiled at a different rate. I just like to put a grayscale texture, like one of these rock occlusion maps. This one's kind of cool. You can see what it's done already, like it's created like dirt or imperfections that are tiled at a different rate. So if I make it really small, you can really see what happens here. It creates basically like splotches, overlays on top of this wood. And since it's not tiled at 2, it's tiled at 0.2, the repeating nature of the texture is much less noticeable. So I don't want it to be that intense. I'll do 1 and 2. The detail tiled at 1 and the wood tiled at 2, just based on me looking at it and making an artistic decision. Of course, we also want normal maps, so let's drag in the normal map here. In previous years, I'd probably just throw this on and say it looks fine, but now I would say that's a little too intense. So let's bring it down to like 0.6. That's a bit better. And then the metallic and smoothness. Sometimes I like to just bring the metallic value a little bit up just to give it more flair and interest. I don't know why or if that makes any sort of sense at all, but again, artistic decisions. You can just kind of play with the values. For this kind of wood, I do expect it to be kind of shiny, but maybe not that shiny. So I'll bring the smoothness down. That looks a lot better, I think. Or maybe it needs to be shiny and then the roughness has to go down. Let's split the difference somewhere in the middle. 0.45, smoothness like that, and that looks pretty good. Last step here will be the occlusion map. So this is just additional shadowing, waiting for it to compile there. And as a habit for all of the burden of truth materials, I like to add occlusion maps wherever I can, but then just set them to half intensity. As you can see, it kind of eliminates the reflection just globally across the whole object. So it's important to not like completely eliminate that, but also if all of the objects had this and then one of them did not, then it would quite clearly stand out. So just consistently across all the materials, I try to add some sort of occlusion or darken it a bit, and I go around half, I guess. Obviously, for a PBR workflow, there's more technical reasons why you want an occlusion map. And the occlusion maps that I'm using are ones that I generated, which are not perfect at all. Like they're just, look at it here, they're just kind of exactly the same as this, but just in grayscale and squashed down. And obviously that doesn't really reflect what the shadowing on this wood is. So this is not an accurate occlusion map. It's just kind of a rough approximation of darkening some of the materials. And that's kind of the way that I use it right now. For a full PBR workflow, you'd probably want to bake in your occlusion map from a 3D model or get a more accurate texture from Polyhaven. I don't really care so much about that. I just want to keep the style consistent for this method that I've discovered. For a different project, if I was to go more realistic, then I might go that route. But for now, these are just simple tricks that I think define the burden of truth style a bit more clearly. One other thing that's good for the base structure model is to turn on static. This will allow Unity to statically batch all these objects together into a single draw call if it can, which is not always good because if you have a lot of static geometry that's behind the camera, that geometry can no longer be culled when the camera turns away from it. But it is good for big, large pieces of geometry like this level because rather than it having to go through, like first render the walls, then render the floor, then render the ceiling, they all turn into one big mesh on export. That's obviously a lot faster, and I don't know if it can eliminate overdraw or anything like that, but it's definitely going to reduce the draw calls. So for that reason, these big structure materials, or these big structure objects get the static flag. And then another thing that I should do is change the light layer to static geometry. And this will allow me to use decals because for the decal setup that I have they only work on a specific light layer. That's to avoid casting decals onto moving objects such as cross. Alright, so let's continue with the base material work. One change I want to make for the ceiling is to not have it be wood. I'll probably make it more traditional tile, so I'll search for tile. And I can pick from any one of these. I don't want it to look too much like an office building office. It should look a little more like a home. So maybe this one? It's too much. It's kind of hard to tell with the lighting, so I can just preview with it off. I don't know, that looks more like a bathroom floor. Maybe. This would be a good time to look at reference. So I do have these reference images pulled up for Law Office. Obviously the original level was not made with this stuff in mind. So it's kind of hard to merge these ideas into that, but we can try our best. I do like this. It's a plain wall, but it has kind of like an indent to give it more shape. It feels like that might make sense. I'm seeing a lot of plain walls. Here's kind of like a big tile that I don't think I have a texture for. And there is some wood approaches. I think I like this idea, so I'm going to shamelessly steal it. Sorry, architects.